grew up in the King's Arms Tavern under Mrs. Jane Vobe, V-O-B-E. You have to understand, Mrs. Vobe is a dynamic woman, amen? She's not quiet, she's like me, a Baptist, amen? Very, very much authoritative, but very much a person that knew how to make taverns profitable. She grew up in a tavern family, had the knowledge. Taverns are not easy to start. And she not only purchased that tavern called the Carter Tavern, but named it the King's Arms. And the first day she was open, she was profitable. And that, of course, helped me tremendously since I'm sort of her right hand. Amen? Amen. A lot of things for me was through the blessings of Mrs. Vogue. She didn't have to allow me to be ordained in 1772 by 20 illegal white Baptist preachers. Amen? She did not have to give me the blessings of ordination, but she did. She also didn't have to allow me to preach every Sunday with my congregation out of Green Springs. Never miss a Sunday. And guess what the most profitable day for taverns? Sundays. So that shows you her heart, her mind. She was truly more advanced in the mind than many owners of slaves in the slave society. We found no other relationship like it. And not only would she allow me ordination and with my congregation, but she also gave me the freedom to choose my day of freedom, amen? Before she passed away in 1786 up in Richmond Town. So I grew up in the institution of slavery, not my choice. I always tell people, nobody chooses to be a slave, amen? I mean, that's just not what people do. And I wouldn't have been a slave if the legislators in Jamestown in 1670 had written the law to make my condition what it was in Virginia. Not the first colony to ever write the law of legal slavery. Massachusetts was the first colony, amen? Slavery started in the North. The South was the last to take up slavery on its soil. Georgia was the last colony of the 13 to have slavery on its soil. Amen? Why? Because King George II, King George the third father said, I don't want the evils of the institution of African slavery on the dirt named after me. Georgia is named after King George II. So who were the labor force until 1748 when Georgia would finally write the first law to make African slavery now on Georgia's soil? Irish indentured servants or Irish convict servants. Georgia was a penal colony. And don't think the Irish did not suffer. Amen? Don't get me to preach now. Don't take much, amen? I am a real Baptist, amen? The Irish suffered under the persecution of the English. I tell you what, I want to teach you something really quick because people don't understand. When I tell this story, you don't understand what I'm talking about. The first conquerors of the English were who? You ever seen a coat of arms? Go to the palace, go to the Capitol, you'll see the coat of arms. What the coat of arms will show you is a lion, right? Holding a chain around the neck of the unicorn. Who's a unicorn? Scotland. And under the foot of that lion is a barley stone. Who's that? Guess what was there two countries, even in Great Britain, that did not allow African slavery on the soil? Scotland and Ireland. You never know what I'm going to come with, amen? But you need to know, people do not understand how this slavery, you're not born a slave. No one is born a slave. Slavery was created. The French would do it differently, the German would do it differently, the Irish, the Italians would do it differently. The English will only write African slavery by first writing the law. That's why you have 13 different colonies, you have 13 different slavers. Massachusetts first colony, 1636. Virginia would not write slavery until 1670 in Jamestown because of tobacco, amen, and other grain crops. And the law was very clear. Any Negro, mulatto, Indian coming by land or sea from a non-Christian country will be a slave for the rest of your natural life. Conditions set upon the mother is the condition of the child. That should be foreign to your ears. Roman law says what? Condition of the father is the condition of the son. So this law is written for what purpose? Perpetual slavery for the rest of your natural life. So as I said, when I was conceived in my mother's womb, before I was even birthed, that law was already enacted. So I had no choice when I came out of the womb of what I would be as far as Virginia was concerned. But God had a whole nother business, amen? For my business here in this colony of Virginia, amen? I call my story the story of Joseph in the Bible, remember? Joseph was sold into slavery, right? His brother sold him into slavery, in the institution of slavery. Ended up, of course, in prison, did he not? Yeah. Potiphar's wife and all. But God did what he did to me. Reached down in that prison, pulled Joseph out of that prison into the palace of Pharaoh. Amen? Amen. But he took me out of the institution of slavery, made me the first black preacher ordained in North America as a Baptist. Amen? Amen. With now, of course, the first and only Baptist church in Williamsburg. I think God deserves a big hand for that. Today we are breaking ground to dedicate the building of my church on Nassau Street. As I said, always want to thank the Lees for tolerating illegal Baptists. And I mean white Baptists. See, people do not understand the real story. Black Baptists, black Methodists, black Presbyterians, black Quakers, Dunkin', Lutheran, Amish, Mennonite, Moravians, William, Brethren, Catholic, Jewish, Episcopal Church of America will not come until much later. So who were the one tortured and beaten like dogs in the revival fields? White Baptists, Methodists, Presbyterians, Quakers, Dunkers. Look, I would see that with my own eyes. They suffered because when the Church of England deems you to be illegal and we will only tolerate you, denominations, preachers, if you will follow our rule. And the rule for all of the denominations are named preachers, priests, rabbis. If you're in 11 of the 13 colonies, when you first touch base to that colony, head straight to the King's Courts. They're all called King's Courts in all 13 colonies. But in 11 of the 13 colonies, you have to go to the courts for a particular reason, preachers. You have to ask that judge, who will be an Anglican. You can't hold public office unless you have the Church of England. You can't be a sheriff, you can't be a deputy, you can't be a mayor, you can't be a governor, you can't be a judge, you can't be a lawyer, unless you have the church. So every one of the House of Burgesses is for Church of England. The Governor's Council, Church of England. Amen? So that's how they control the population of the British throughout the British Empire. Through the Church of England. Amen? Why do you think it would be mandatory to attend divine service one Sunday out? Mandatory. You don't break that law. as which most of you would have, Church of England, amen? In Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Maryland, and Delaware. By the day that you're 10 days old, you're taken to the local parish church, baptized, Christianized into the Church of England for the rest of your natural life. Who's the head of the church? King. The king or queen, whoever's the monarch. And so therefore, you're going to that court to ask that Anglican judge to issue you a license to preach in that colony. If you do not have that license signed and sealed by a judge in that colony, and that sheriff catches you preaching in that colony without that license, you will be immediately beaten, then taken to jail. And you will be in that jailhouse until your court date. After that court date is set, you will be taken out of jail by the jailer, taken to the court, and then you will be charged with the charge preaching without the proper license, disturbing the king's peace. Sentenced back to that jailhouse for 3 to 6 months. And when you leave this time out of that jail, do not come in that colony ever. That was the life of Baptist preachers, Methodist preachers, Presbyterian, Quaker, Duncan, Lutheran, Amish, Mennonite, Moravian, Sabino, Catholic, Jewish, Mohammedan, Episcopal Church of America. So, what are the 2 colonies that will allow you to be all of these denominations?
Pennsylvania.
Hey, give Pennsylvania a big hand. Pennsylvania. And by the way, give William Penn a big hand. William Penn. Give him a big hand. Give him a big hand. Founder, wrote the charter. You ever read the charter of Pennsylvania? No. Pennsylvanians, read your charter. That was written by William Penn. Because you will see a sentence like none other in the rest of the 11 or 13 colonies. Charter. And that sentence, this colony of Pennsylvania will always be a colony of religious liberty for all religions, all denominations. Give William Penn, that Quaker, another big hand. He is the reason Quakers and Amish and Mennonites and all were loaded up in Pennsylvania. Amen? And then all other denominations. Thank God. Amen. There was I always call that colony, Pennsylvania colony, it's the lighthouse that gave hope to the other 11 or 13. That one day we might be like you. That it's going to take a war called 1776 for us to obtain what Pennsylvania already had. And the second colony would be Rhode Island. Give Rhode Island a big hand. And that is because of Roger Williams. See, we always say our God is a God of predestination. Some of you might not believe what I'm talking about. Amen. But I say predestination, meaning, I'll put it this way, I kind of make it simple for you. Job, remember Job in the Bible? Mm-hmm. Job, of course, had been challenged, to be the man of God, that even when Satan was going by to and fro, Job was the man chosen by God, that he would stand the test. Amen? Mm-hmm. But even in standing that test, sometimes you get discouraged. Because you go through a whole lot of suffering. Job lost everything he had. Mm-hmm. Suffered all kinds of pains and wounds. Don't get me wrong. I understand as a human Job's condition. But Job must have gotten such a feeling sorry for himself. Condition. God would say to Job, Job, where were you when I hung the stars? Job, where were you when I hung the moon and the sun? Job, where were you when I built the mountains and had the waters flow? Job was kind of straightened up a little bit then. You don't want to be lectured by God. Amen. So Job is sort of like us. Amen. Condition. We do get discouraged sometimes. But God was sending a message. While he still was hanging the stars and the moon and the sun and building the mountains and the rivers flowing and all the day and all the night that came, he was also saving us as a nation. Amen? Don't think our God can't do one thing and do another thing and another thing. Our God is an omnipotent God. Amen? Amen. Omnipresent God. Amen? Amen. So he can do more than one thing at one time. And while he was hanging a star, he's already sending us the three heroes that we needed in the 1730s. The Reverend John Wesley, the Reverend Charles Wesley, the Reverend George Whitefield. Amen? Amen? They had already gone to the fire. God had already set them to the fire of the three countries that they had lit the first Great Awakening. And in the 1730s, had come Governor Oglethorpe, Georgia. I love this. I love Georgia. Amen? Happened to see John Wesley on the streets of London and said, aren't you one of the preachers I've been preaching outside? Got these revivals going. I want you to come to Georgia. Bring your brother. Amen? And he did. But that was already God's plan to have Governor Oglethorpe to ask John Wesley, Charles Wesley to come to Georgia, because not only did they come to Georgia in the 1730s, they brought a whole new denomination with them on that vote. Amen? The Moravians. Amen? And I don't know if you know about Moravians. Go to a place called Salem, North Carolina. Amen? Some say they might call it, if I prophesied, Winston-Salem. Amen? North Carolina's, that's where John Wesley settled those Moravians that he brought in.